Hello, and thank you for tuning in to D&V Market Views, our videocast where we discuss the latest market developments. And today we continue our discussion with Martin Stopford. In the last episode, we mainly focused on the short-term disruptions, or choke points if you like. Channel closures, wars, military conflicts, or other disruptions forcing shipping to change its behavior and adapt to a new reality. Say whatever you want, but this industry has a well-proven record of finding new ways to adjust, reshape, or even completely redesign its modus operandi to fit into whatever the future might bring. We continue our discussion trying to address what is arguably the biggest disruption of all, the transition to clean fuels, or a zero-emissions future, if you like. Do we have a plan? How long will it take? Do we know all the pieces of the puzzle? Who is responsible for emissions? It is often stated that we are all responsible. And personally, I'm not too fond of such a slogan, as in reality, all usually means nobody. Planning is essential, so we discuss a three-step strategy to put shipping on the new path. We finished the last episode alluding to Abraham Lincoln's speech, House Divided. So how do we proceed in that divided house where all individuals, even with seemingly common goals, follow different paths? How do we make sure that we all take adequate roles? And who are the people who can transform the industry, especially in such a short time? Is it only about new technologies? And above all, are there any lessons we can learn from the past? Please join us in the second part of our discussion, where we try to envisage how to invest in shipping that needs to tackle the green transformation. If you missed it, I encourage you to start by watching the first part of our discussion called From Crisis to Opportunity, which is a good starting point for today's episode. My name is Jakub Walenkiewicz, and you're watching D&V Market Views.
So we've covered pretty much the operational disruptions, things that we've experienced over the past few years. But there's obviously one subject we haven't touched upon, which is decarbonization. And that, I have to say, pretty much, takes all the attention now in shipping, almost all the attention. It's a sort of a slog, and we can talk in the different angles, and everyone had opinions. But when you talk to owners, they often say, "Okay, so what should I do? What should I do? How should I invest?" Oh, they don't have to be honest. You can talk to bankers; they have just equally big problem. So, and I know that you've sort of plotted the way ahead, the way you see it, in sort of three phases, sort of a short term, let's say the next 3 years, and then the medium term, sort of 4 to 10 years, and then eventually where do we go beyond in terms of decarbonization and changing the whole system? Because it seems like we up for, I don't know, would you call it a revolution, like the same like steam to diesel, or is it the same magnitude you think we're heading for? Or?
Well, of course, I think a revolution is a word to steer clear of. I mean, revolutions are where someone appears at 4 o'clock in the morning and carts you off and you're never seen again. And
yes,
I think, whereas if you look at the history of shipping, it's not nothing happens overnight in shipping. Yeah. It took about 50 years to get from the first steam engine to something that was even vaguely passable as a steamship able to trade globally. Mm-hmm. And it took another 50 years to get to a really efficient version of that ship. Good, yeah. And then you're into diesel, and take a look at containerization. I mean, that started in 1956, and it was really the 90s before it was a substantial force in the business. So, I don't think you should expect change overnight. Mm-hmm. And that certainly strikes me as being a good starting point for the question you just asked, because the problem today is we've got a pretty good idea about what society wants out of us. Mm-hmm. They want no emissions, and they want cheap freight. And they want
an overnight service at the same time.
An even better service than they had previously. So we know that's what they want. Mm-hmm. And the other thing we know pretty well is that we don't know how to deliver those or when we will be able to deliver those. Mm-hmm. And I think there's it's reassuring to say, well, look, you go back to that great revolution of steamships, and in 1865, Alfred Holt, who was the real Elon Musk of steamshipping. What he said is, we know about the boilers, we know about the problem of getting coal, we know about the propulsion problem, we know about the problem of making ships out of steel. The problem is we don't know how all the bits fit together. And it was that practicality of bringing all the pieces together and making them work. And really, that seems to me, he did that in his prototype ship, the Agamemnon. But the improvement in efficiency from the Agamemnon to a steamship 30, 40 years later was 30 or 40. It got better in every way. So you take step one and then you improve. You go into the improvement phase. And I think the issue today is that one has to accept that you can't build the definitive ship because the technology isn't there. And so my feeling, and the reason I sort of suggest the three, taking it in 3 steps, is to reflect that. The first step for the next 3 years, you really, it seems to me, can't get into the nitty-gritty of rebuilding green ships because you're not going to get the components. So what you're doing is you're building foundations, and the 3 foundations for that future, the first one is that we have to think very hard about the replacement of the existing fleet. You've got to take stock of your existing business, because whatever else it is, it's probably not going to work that well in future. So you take a good look at that. At the same time as you do that, second thing, you look at your retrofitting plan, because not retrofitting, but the plan, because on my model of projections, the existing fleet on the water today will create about half the emissions by 2050. So doing something about that is a high priority. It's something that you can do, but I think all of the studies I've seen of retrofitting suggest that there are many small parts, and you have to put them all together, and information's a big part of it. And therefore, in the step one, you're planning the retrofitting. You're not actually doing it. You're spending a couple of years to just get familiar with your fleet and decide what is the best way to retrofit it. And so if you take those steps together, you're going to need people. And so not only do you plan the retrofitting of your ships, you plan the retrofitting of your organization, because the shipping companies that we've been operating in the last 30 years are about cost minimization. I mean, the average shipping company has 2 people in the office for every ship at sea. And when you start looking at new technology and management, that is not very good. It has far more people at sea, crews of 20, 25 per ship, but not necessarily fully utilized. And so the whole question of bringing ship and shore together and dealing with the labour problem, which shipping now faces, just like the farming business that I was in for the last 12 years. We were finding it really difficult to get young labour. Not because you couldn't get young labour, but you couldn't pay enough. So we need a business that pays for a decent staff of people, and that needs careful thought, because building organizations takes 10 years. So those are the first 3 steps anyway. I'm going to stop there.
But do you think, because you talk a lot about people, do you think that is also possible, the completely different breed of people, if I may say so? Because, if you use the same people, they'll only do the same things. It's very difficult to sort of promote change. Whereas, you do have occasionally, I would say, people from completely outside of a shipping fairy tale, if I can say, and trying to engage in shipping because all of a sudden they've got an idea. I think we had Amazon trying to build their own fleet. So far it's quiet. I know that Lidl in Germany all of a sudden realized that perhaps buying Canadian vessels was a good idea. I don't think they want this anymore. But, you can tell that it's people from outside of shipping who've got ideas how to change that. I remember they were particularly petrified. I don't know, maybe that was Amazon actually, that looked into the port's capacity utilization, and it turned out it was far from, even 50%. It often was below that. And it's like, how can you run a business like that? How can't you just optimize it better? Do you think there's going to be newcomers, new people creating the new reality? At least to some extent.
You've raised 2 questions there. One is the whole question of people, and the other is the question of digital systems, and why it is that the digital systems are so dysfunctional in the shipping business. And on the people front, it is a different business. It used to be massively popular. Young lads ran away to sea because it was a wonderful life. You got on the ship and, you went to Shanghai and you had a couple of months in Shanghai while they were discharging the cargo.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it was a really exciting business. A lot of that's disappeared, but it's not. I think you have a think about it and find ways you can make being on a ship very attractive. There are, if you make the job interesting, let's face it, during COVID, everybody got used to going and working at home. We need to get people used to working on a ship and get away from the kids for 3 months, It's, how good is that? So I think that the personnel issue, it needs thought. I'm not going to, in a talk like this, all you can say is that what I'm saying is not how you do it. I'm saying it's worth thinking about the structure of the organization you want and then being willing to spend some money on creating it. And if you pay the money, you'll get the thing. Yeah. But you need to get the business all committed. And it's very interesting that if you read the history, when Mr. Moller developed containerization, he did a very unusual thing. When everybody else was buying container ships in 1966, he actually focused very much on planning the business, and they didn't do anything for 10 years. And one of the main aims of his strategy during that time, and it's all covered in the history book, is that he sold the idea of being the best container company in the world to his management team, and it took him years to do that. They didn't do that till 1972, 73. Yeah. And then when they finally launched their service in 1976, they had covered every base in great detail, and they built a business. And I think that, if anybody thinks planning isn't worthwhile in shipping, they should jolly well read the Maersk company history, because it's one of. In fact, I believe it was a case study at Harvard that Mr. Moller's management of containerization. Someone told me the other day that was a case study at Harvard's Business School. Okay.
So planning is key.
And perhaps that brings me on to another issue if I...
Yeah.
I hate...
Go on.
I keep going on here, But the whole problem of integrating businesses is very central. One of the most famous business and wonderful quotations was Abraham Lincoln's idea that if we could first know where we are and whether we're tending, we would better know what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
And that was in his famous speech, A House Divided. And it was over what he was saying basically is, if we're to get forwards, we can't do it as two different separate houses, which was in other words, they were totally split over slavery. And I think you could say the same thing about shipping. You know, if we're going to do what we've got to do, we can't do it with an equipment industry that's doing one thing, a shipyard capacity which is doing another thing, shipping companies that do a third thing, and all in this very complex and really quite highly regulated now global industry, quite unlike anything else. And so somehow the industry is going to have to solve this house divided problem. I don't know how do they do that?
Well, it's probably yet to be seen. But I mean, I can't not ask the next question now, which I believe you sort of you have it in a longer perspective. You know, the role of cargo owners, because I mean, undeniably, you know, this is going to cost money. And it's very easy to say the ship owner should do this and that. But the truth is actually, well, someone has to pay for that. And the cargo owner has been extremely vocal, at least over the past 5 years, I would say, creating a lot of headlines, you know, how we should turn everything to be green. And I mean, thanks for that. I mean, they've got a lot of money. They've got an extra zeros compared to ship owners, right? But where do you see their role in make the change happen? Because arguably, I mean, you need to get cargo owners and probably bankers together at the same table and just to create this room united to make sure that everyone pulls the same direction.
I think perhaps the interesting thing here is to see the way the role of cargo has changed so much in the last 30 or 40 years. I mean, when I started work 50 years ago, Shell made a film called On Any Day. And what it showed was oil being transported, and it told the story of how the 7 oil majors worked together to make sure that they delivered cargo to every part of the globe, big ships, small ships. If one of the ships had problems, they would between them sort it out so that every tanker went straight onto the berth. And, you know, in those days, the average tanker delivered 24,000 ton-miles per deadweight of cargo. Today, it's probably closer to 48,000. Today, it's down to about 20 to 24,000. It's more than halved because we've lost the logistics. And the reason for that was that the oil companies ran the tanker business as long as they needed to motivate the shipping industry to build the big ships they needed, because nobody would buy VLCCs on spec to begin with. There was no spot market. Once you'd got a big fleet, they moved to the spot market, and they found they could get ships very, very cheaply, much cheaper than they could build them and run them themselves. So they used the spot market. And a word you very rarely hear. I mean, I go around and do, I do sort of workshops with companies. You very seldom hear the word customer in the ship, because the cargo owner are charterers. They're not really customers, and because uniquely in shipping, every single transaction is negotiated individually. I think that's worked very well for the last 50 years. Got very cheap freight, but as we move into this new era, I think I can't see how you can do it without cargo taking the lead, and as you say, the cargo, they're not people who will line up to make ship owners rich.
Not necessarily.
But they, I think, are part of an equation that in the end will be needed in order to make the digital technology work, because we're trying to get some synchronization of digital information in a business where everybody, in human nature, you want to hang on to your data. And so I think it needs cargo to take a lead there. And they are quite capable of doing that when the time's right. I think, when the time is right and when the pressure's really on, then, which is probably in 3 or 4 years' time, then we're going to need cargo to step forwards.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think they took a role, at least. I mean, I can say that they do see the need for change, and I think they know that they are probably the absolute enabler, simply because of the size of the companies they represent, and they bring business to shipping, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's true, but this just, what pops into my mind there is something Peter Drucker said, who's one of my favourite management gurus, and he says that we all know you really can't predict the future, and if you accept that, that's a very good. It's very good to start by, not kidding yourself. You can predict things, but what you can do is prepare for the things that will happen in future. We do know what will happen in future, and I think and what we're going to need, I think definitely as businesses, they are going to need the capacity to manage in a way that they don't need to manage today. We're going to need the technical skills that we don't have today, and I think we're going to need some sort of commercial framework which will make it possible to develop highly speculative ships, which you're going to have to keep retrofitting, and we're going through the same thing as they went through in the steam era, basically.
One last question, as time definitely is against us, but I have to ask it, of course, because as much as I like the way you sort of explain the whole process, I mean, at least there is a sense of urgency. That's what's created. It's a huge pressure coming from regulators. We've got IMO on the one hand, and then you've got EU sort of almost competing. EU is often not too content about the speed IMO progresses. The same thing happens with the companies that the ship owners. They try to build these strategies, and I can tell that now we talk about alternative fuels because this is where I'm actually heading. So let's call them all. Whether you talk about biofuel, whether you talk about e-fuels, blue fuels, you take it. But when do you think? I know that you do mention them in the second phase of your process, where 4 to 10 years, where we gradually start to implement them. But at the moment, it's a little bit like we have to plan and we have to sit back and we need to make conscious decisions. But it doesn't seem like we're making conscious decisions. We're actually rushing because there's new regulations, because there's always the deadline. You must, otherwise this is going to cost you. Do you think we have that much time to develop those strategies? Well, perhaps. Do we have enough wisdom to develop them? And
well, if you're absolutely desperate to get carbon down, you just slow the fleet down and build as many ships as you possibly can with what you've got now. I mean, if you must do it now, I think what you're saying is we want a clever solution, and I think the danger is that you become obsessed with minor issues. I mean, I would say green fuels is a rather minor issue in all of this.
Okay.
It's not a particular. Green fuels are a poor substitute for heavy fuel oil, and there are many other areas where you can develop, move the industry towards the same end. And I think the first, it's 4 that come into my mind. The first one is short sea batteries.
Yeah.
I mean, batteries are absolutely there, and the way the geopolitics are going at the moment, we can move up towards a position where we are actually delivering cargo much closer to its final destination. And in places like Indonesia and Malaysia, if you have got big fleets of small electric ships providing the Uber-esque services, then you're in a position to open up these economies which don't have good inland. They really need sea transport. Same thing in the North Sea and the Irish Sea, the Mediterranean. So, and of course, if you use short sea and battery, you immediately get a much greater benefit because there's 50% energy loss in the diesel engine.
Yeah, of course.
So you're going to an electric engine. So short sea, big thing. Second thing is that the green fuels, we're going to have to use them because there isn't going to be anything else around. And so you build those ships. It's not a very difficult decision. Dual fuel is perfectly okay, and you build those in. I can't see shipping, though, getting the amount of green fuel that it will require in a reasonable timescale. So I think the third issue is there's two other potential sources of energy.
Yeah.
One is nuclear, which I
was hoping you were getting there. Exactly.
I mean, nuclear, I think, with the molten salt reactors is, it's the best long-term option, and it's uniquely suitable for shipping because you can, people like Core Power can offer a sort of 20 megawatt engine, which is just fine for ships. And it's not very dangerous in the sense you don't get the fallout. Yeah. So I think nuclear. But the other one is carbon capture. I mean, as I sit down and run my model, this great big model, it's only arithmetic, but I run it out, and you get to 2035, and you're going to need vast quantities of green fuel. And there are so many other contenders for it. I just don't... And it's not that good for shipping. You've got to bunker it. And so I think I really like the idea of carbon capture. And if you use carbon capture on existing ships, you slow them down, they go a bit slower, they turn it into dry ice, you sell the dry ice. When you bunker, you sell the dry ice to a company synthesizing methanol that sells the methanol back to a shipping company. And you've got this sort of virtuous circle which is helping a lot. And there is lots of new technology coming along there, and I really think that's, carbon capture, it's small beer, as one of the Swedish owners said, it's like, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a very good step forward.
It's on the other side of a scale. If you look at the alternative fuels being too expensive, basically, the carbon capture gives you an alternative. And
I think I'm glad you've reminded me on that, because if we are moving to a norm where bunkers is thousands of dollars a ton, not hundreds of dollars a ton, then that is going to change the whole economics.
Oh, absolutely.
And it will move the speeds down. And it will change. Retrofitting suddenly becomes an absolute game changer, as does digital information systems.
Well, absolutely.
The cost of moving things becomes so high.
Well, I mean, it can render some of the trades completely, impossible in a way, because there won't be any arbitrage, and then you can't just say it's like you're going to pay $6,000 a ton and you should be fine. You won't be fine because there won't be any trade for you available.
Well, it raises the bar, and I think that, and again, I think this is if I was running a business now like that, I would want to feel enabled. I'd be trying to get into a position where with 28, 29, you can really, if you really decide what to do, you've got people who can go out and do it. Because that's the key of any business, is the fact that you can't run a business on your own. You can't run ships on your own.
Of course not.
And you're going to need people, and it takes time to build a team. And that's what artificial intelligence doesn't do. And it doesn't bind people together in quite that way. It facilitates. But in the end, the core to shipping in the next 30 years will be the intercommunication of people, groups of people, teams of people. That's the way you make things happen.
Yeah. The last question, because we talk about nuclear, and then because we talked before our program about it. The nuclear has one problem with its cost is very high. Well, we're trying to get it down into, we can make it work probably at this point, but it's still the question of how much this is going to cost you. But I remember you said that the diesel, when the first movers to diesel weren't particularly economically viable either. And it's like, so That seems to be the same case now with nuclear, isn't it? Perhaps we need to have a first movers.
Well, yes. I mean, what nuclear are saying is what the sort of nuclear investors, people like TerraPower, are saying is that the big difference is, well, first of all, they're not using new technology. I mean, they had molten salt reactors in the 1960s.
Yes.
They worked fine over several years. Not commercially, but they were on trial. The second thing is that the molten salt has this enormous advantage. It doesn't have a nuclear plume because it works at atmospheric pressure.
Yeah.
So if you crack the reactor vessel, you don't get a cloud of explosive gas. You might get a little bit of molten salt dribbles out, but where better place for that to happen than at sea? It just sinks to the bottom of the sea, and you get a solid block of salt with the uranium in it. The economics, I've chatted a lot to people about this, and you never know until it's done. But one of the advantages, a lot of the cost of the nuclear ship is the cost of the fuel.
The fuel, yeah.
I mean, the numbers that I was quoted a few months ago was $150 million for a small reactor and $250 million for the fuel.
Yeah.
But then you don't use much, apparently you don't use much of the fuel, so you in some shape or form, you get a lot of it back at the end.
When you sell, yeah.
So that might help the economics.
I think if you look at it now, that's, let's say, 400 million altogether. If you say a reactor plus fuel, whatever you get back remains to be a question. But then if you take a vessel today and like an Aframax, you're probably looking easily 120, 150 million spent on bunkers over the lifetime of that vessel. So it's not far off, probably. It seems like it works. But I remember you said that the first diesel vessel was probably re-engined 3 times, right?
It was, yes. It was, and the third engine was a third the size of the original. In 1938, the first one was enormous. The third one, you got lots of room left in the engine room. What I like about carbon capture and nuclear is they're engineering-based solutions. In other words, you can work at them, and the basics are fine. There's nothing. I haven't seen any real nasties about them. What you can see is the way that over a period of decades you start to engineer them into things that really do work very nicely and just become the norm. And I think that on both accounts, carbon capture could work extremely well, and so can nuclear. And they are a way forwards for a more technical industry.
Absolutely. Well, then. We cannot disqualify green fuels altogether. I mean, it's yet to be seen at what price tag we can produce them, and also what is the energy that we need to put in to produce. Perhaps in the next decade or two, they will be far more achievable and thus indeed cheaper to use. And I think there's going to be a certain combination of all of those.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying. I mean, in my my projections, you end up having a lot of green fuel.
Of course,
because. You need the ships.
You need the ships,
if you assume we're going to be moving 15 billion tons of trade, and we haven't talked about that much, but if you want more trade for a growing world, then you need more ships, and that means green fuel will be available. But it's just that it has a lot of drawbacks, and so you move beyond that. You know, it's like coal and oil. Oil is a vastly better fuel than coal, but it took 50 years to get round to using oil, and when they did, it transformed the business. You couldn't really have built a ULCC powered by coal.
Definitely not. Yeah. Well, perhaps it's a step change again.
So I think it's a step change, and that's the sort of thing. It's fascinating. I mean, what a wonderful time to be moving into the business. I'm very envious of young, especially young technical people who've got a bit of economics, a bit of digital, and lots of technical knowledge. I think the world's their oyster, and those are the people we're going to need to build the next generation of shipping.
sounds fascinating. Definitely for them. Up against a completely new reality. Martin, thank you so much for being with us today. That was absolutely great. I have to say that, I don't know how about you guys, but I definitely feel like a time traveler now. We've gone back, I think it was 2000 before Christ. That's well done. And then now we're up to 2050, which, by the way, is not so distant. You know, people talk about like this is the future, but you know, it's just around the corner from us right now. But this was fascinating, and I have to say that, you know, if there's anything we can sure about is that the complexity is definitely growing, and it is going to be a lot more sort of, well, quite a fancy ride, I must say, as you just said, those new engineers going to, you know, but it's all of us, and perhaps shipping's going to look also quite a bit different. It's not going to be like old-fashioned, some people say boring, but there's going to be quite an eventful ride.
Shipping has uniquely, shipping has a 5,000-year history of moving along, usually with the most basic, simple technology it can lay hands on, you know.
Thank you for joining D&V Market Views. Throughout the past 2 episodes, we covered a great deal of disruptive factors and challenges ahead. As it appears, shipping deals with those disruptions pretty well, often taking advantage of the situation. However, adapting is not always easy, particularly when facing the game changes such as energy transition. It is a step-by-step change that requires a new approach, business models, skills and people. Altogether, it creates complexity and uncertainty, which are not necessarily the closest friends to investment and capital deployment. Nevertheless, as change appears necessary, it is important to have a well-thought strategy that addresses all essential factors and moving parts that will allow your company to survive and thrive in the future and non-carbon future. Once again, a big thank you to Dr. Martin Stopford for sharing his views with us. It has been a fascinating discussion where we allowed ourselves to travel in time across the entire shipping history. Martin, we cannot wait until the new edition of Maritime Economics is available, particularly with all the new elements that you had to add, some of which we probably have just touched upon. As always, we encourage you to explore all resources available on our Maritime Impact online platform at dnv.com/mi. Stay tuned for the upcoming episodes of D&V Market Views. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.